In 1871, on a Saturday night in a Nevada mining town, a saloon owner nailed a hand-painted sign above his door. It said, "Special Entertainment Tonight." By 9 o'clock, the room was packed so tight men were standing on the bar to see over the crowd. What they had come to watch had nothing to do with cards or piano music. The floor had been cleared. A wooden pit had been assembled in the center of the room, and inside it something was moving. Welcome to Mystery Wild West. And what you're about to hear will make you rethink every saloon scene you've ever watched on screen. If this is the kind of history that goes to the places other people skip, subscribe. We don't flinch here. Before we go further, think about this. When you picture a Wild West saloon, what do you see? Swinging doors, card games, a woman at the piano. Tell us in the comments, because what was actually happening on those floors, most nights, was something Hollywood has never once shown you. The saloon, as most people imagine it, is a comfortable lie, clean glasses, fair card games, colorful characters with interesting hats, a bartender who listens and pours whiskey, and occasionally breaks up a fight with a shotgun kept under the bar. That image was constructed deliberately over decades by novelists and filmmakers and tourism boards who understood that the real thing was harder to romanticize. The real saloon was a place of business. Its business was extracting money from men who had very little to do and a lot of cash from recent work. Miners flush from a good week, cowboys paid off at the end of a drive, laborers with one night to spend before heading back to the camps. The saloon's job was to get that money out of their pockets as fast as possible and put it into the owner's pocket. Whiskey helped, gambling helped, women helped. And when those things weren't enough to keep the crowd loud and spending, something else was required. That's not what actually happened in the mythology. But in the actual saloons, it happened constantly. The entertainment was the hook. It was what made men choose one saloon over another, what made them stay until 2 in the morning instead of leaving at midnight, what made them order another round because the action in the pit was just getting started and they weren't about to walk away now. And the entertainment that packed a saloon tighter than any card game or piano player was blood. Here is what rat baiting looked like in practice. A saloon owner would spend days collecting rats from grain stores, from alleyways, from the tunnels and basements of the town. Hundreds of them sometimes kept in crates and starved for a day or two before the event. A starved rat is aggressive in ways that a fed rat is not. The men who kept the rats knew this and used it. On the night of the event, the pit went up. 4 wooden walls, maybe 4 feet high, sat in the middle of the saloon floor. The rats went in first, a mass of them, moving against each other in the tight space, the noise of them audible even over the drinking crowd. Then the dog went in. The breed most commonly used was a small terrier, a type specifically developed over generations in England and Ireland for exactly this purpose. Compact, fast, with jaws strong relative to their size, and an instinct for killing small prey that had been bred in deliberately. A good rat-baiting dog was not a pet. It was a tool. Its owner had trained it, kept it lean, worked its reflexes. A skilled dog could kill more than 100 rats in under 10 minutes. Betting opened before the dog went in. The primary bet was on time, how long it would take the dog to kill every rat in the pit. Experienced gamblers knew the dogs, knew their records, placed their bets accordingly. New men bet on instinct and gut and whatever the man next to them was saying. The noise was total. The crowd pressed against the pit walls. Men climbed on chairs, on tables, on each other's shoulders. The saloon owner moved through the crowd collecting bets, making change, keeping track. The bartenders kept pouring. The louder it got, the faster people drank. The faster they drank, the louder it got. The floor around the pit became slippery. It was not just spilled whiskey. And this is where things change, because rat baiting, as brutal as it was not even the most extreme thing happening in these buildings. It was, in some ways, the entry-level offering, the thing you could stage any weekend with minimal preparation. The more dramatic events, the ones that brought men in from miles away, the ones that kept a saloon's reputation alive for years, those required larger animals and more elaborate setups. Badger baiting was common in the territories. A badger is not a large animal, but it is one of the most tenacious creatures on the continent. A cornered badger will fight anything. It has thick skin, powerful claws, and an aggression that doesn't diminish even after serious injury. Saloon owners who staged badger baiting events understood that the badger would fight back in ways that a rat simply couldn't, and that this extended the spectacle, raised the tension, made the betting more interesting. A chained badger in a pit against a dog could last far longer than a rat. The dog might be injured. The outcome was genuinely uncertain. And genuine uncertainty was what serious gamblers were paying for. But here's the problem. The most dramatic events, the ones that required weeks of planning and substantial investment, involved larger animals entirely. Bears, sometimes mountain lions, animals that could be captured in the territory, transported to town, and penned until the event date. A bear in a saloon pit changes the mathematics of the room entirely. The pit has to be larger and stronger. The chains securing the bear have to be heavy enough to hold it while still allowing it to fight. The dog, usually a bulldog for this kind of event, heavier and stronger than a terrier, is going in against something that outweighs it by hundreds of pounds. This was the premium entertainment, the event that a saloon advertised weeks in advance, the event that men rode into town specifically to see and bet on. The saloon floor on those nights looked nothing like the movie version. The smell alone would have stopped most modern visitors at the door. Unwashed men, spilled alcohol, sawdust soaked through with blood, and worse, the specific smell of frightened and injured animals. The noise was not the pleasant sound of a piano. It was the roar of 100 men in an enclosed space, all of them shouting at once, all of them watching something that demanded a physical response. The saloon owner stood at the edge of it all and counted his money. Think about who was in that room. Miners who had spent 6 days underground with a pick and a headlamp, seeing nothing but rock and the backs of other men. Cowboys who had been on the trail for 2 months, sleeping on the ground, eating the same food, talking to the same 8 people. Men who lived lives of sustained physical difficulty in isolated conditions, with very little variety or stimulation, who arrived in town with cash and a week before they had to go back. These were not men who wanted a quiet drink and a card game. They wanted something they could not have out in the camps or on the trail. They wanted noise. They wanted spectacle. They wanted the specific release of watching something violent in a crowd of other men who were also watching something violent, all of them connected by the shared experience of it. The saloon owner gave them what they wanted because giving them what they wanted was profitable. And the law? The law was a complicated question. Animal cruelty legislation existed in some territories and states by the 1870s, but enforcement was inconsistent, to put it generously. A sheriff in a mining town in Nevada in 1872 was not typically eager to arrest the saloon owner whose establishment employed a third of the people the sheriff knew and whose property taxes funded a significant portion of the town's operating budget. A deputy might walk through the front door of a saloon during a rat-baiting event, take a look at the crowd, assess the situation, and walk back out. Not because he hadn't seen anything, because the calculation of what it would cost him to act on what he had seen didn't add up in favor of acting. That calculation, played out hundreds of times across dozens of towns, is why the blood sports continued for as long as they did. But it gets worse, because the blood sports were not a secret. They were advertised. Saloon owners posted notices in advance. Men who attended spread the word back to the camps. A saloon with a reputation for good entertainment, which meant, in this context, a reputation for dramatic high-stakes events that paid out to serious bettors, was a destination. Men traveled to it. They planned around it. It was part of the economy of the frontier town the same way the blacksmith and the general store were part of it. The mythology that came later, the cleaned-up saloon of the Western films, required erasing this. Because you cannot have a romantic mythology of the frontier built around a room full of men watching a dog fight a chained bear on a floor soaked with blood while they place bets and drink raw whiskey and cheer. So the mythology replaced it. The piano came in. The card game came in. The elegant saloon girl who drank soda water and exchanged witty remarks with the gunfighter came in. And the blood sports went out, not from the actual saloons, not immediately, but from the story that was being built about the saloons in novels and newspapers and eventually in films. The story was being built while the blood sports were still happening. Here is the question worth sitting with, somewhere in the middle of all this. What does it mean that the most popular entertainment in Wild West saloons was something so far outside what the mythology shows that most people today have never heard of it? It means the mythology was doing a specific job. It was making the frontier legible to audiences who needed to feel a certain way about it. The frontier was supposed to be rugged but moral, violent but purposeful, a place where men tested themselves against nature and each other in ways that built character and civilization. A pit full of rats and a dog trained to kill them in under 10 minutes does not fit that story. So it was left out. What stayed in was the gunfight. The gunfight was also violence, also spectacle, also a test of speed and nerve. But it had a moral logic to it. The faster draw, the steadier hand, the man who was right winning over the man who was wrong. It was violence with a hierarchy. Violence that could be narrated as justice. A dog killing rats has no moral logic. It is just killing. Fast and efficient and ugly, and exactly what both participants were bred and trained for. It cannot be made into a story about right and wrong. So, the mythology took one kind of violence and made it central, and took another kind of violence and erased it entirely. And the version that survived became what people think the Wild West was. The saloons themselves were not confused about what they were. They were businesses. They stocked what sold. And for the better part of 2 decades, from the end of the Civil War through the early 1880s, when anti-cruelty laws started being enforced with more consistency, what sold was the blood sports. Now walk into a specific moment. A Wednesday night in a Colorado mining town in 1873. Not a weekend, not a special event, just a regular night. The saloon is half full. The piano player is there. Yes, the mythology gets that right. But he's playing background noise, filling silence, not performing for anyone in particular. At the back of the room, near the wall, a smaller crowd has gathered. 6 or 8 men, not shouting, talking quietly. A wooden crate sits on the floor between them. Inside the crate, audible even from across the room, is something moving. The barman knows what's in the crate. He's already made space for the pit boards stacked against the back wall. This is not the special event. This is just Tuesday. This is just men in a saloon looking for something to watch while they drink. The crate gets opened at some point in the evening. The pit goes up. The crowd grows. The bets get placed. The barman pours faster because the crowd is bigger now, and the bigger the crowd, the more they drink, and the more they drink, the more they bet. By midnight, the pit comes down. The sawdust gets raked. The floor gets a cursory sweep. The night continues. This happened regularly in saloons across the mining towns and cow towns of the frontier west for years, not as an exception, as a feature. The blood sports were part of how these places worked, part of what made them profitable, part of what drew men in and kept them spending. They were so normal, so much a part of the regular operation of a frontier saloon, that contemporary accounts often mention them the way you'd mention a regular card game, in passing, as background detail, unremarkable. That normality is perhaps the most disturbing part of the story. Not that men watched violent things. Men have always watched violent things, but that the scale and regularity of it, the way it was woven into the ordinary fabric of social life in these towns, was so complete that no one involved seems to have found it remarkable enough to describe in detail. We know it happened because of the accounts that do survive, newspaper notices advertising events, sheriff's records when enforcement occasionally occurred, the journals of travelers who passed through and found themselves in the middle of something unexpected. A man riding west for the first time, stopping for a night in a Kansas cow town, walking into a saloon for a drink, and finding himself at the edge of a pit where a dog was working through a pile of rats while 50 men shouted and swore around him. He wrote about it. He was shocked. The men around him were not. That gap between the traveler's shock and the local's normalcy tells you everything about how embedded this was. And here is the final question. Where did it go? Not all at once, not cleanly. The frontier era ended gradually. The towns acquired more permanent populations. The law got enforced more consistently. And the cultural pressure from the East, from reformers, from animal protection societies that were gaining strength in the 1870s and 80s, started to have real legal effect. By the early 1890s, rat baiting and bear baiting in public venues had been substantially suppressed in most of the former territories. Not eliminated, these things moved into basements and private clubs and back rooms, the way prohibited things always do. But the open, advertised, Saturday night at the saloon version of it declined. And as it declined, the mythology moved in to fill the space it left. The piano got louder in the story. The card game got more central. The elegant gunfighter took up the space where the dog pit had been, and within a generation, the version of the saloon that most people knew came from novels and films rather than from anyone's actual memory. The men who had been in those rooms, who had stood at the edge of a pit in a Nevada saloon in 1872 and bet on a dog against a chained badger, were old men by the time the mythology solidified. Some of them talked, some of them didn't. The ones who didn't left a cleaner version for their grandchildren. The grandchildren grew up watching westerns. The saloon in those westerns was a place of drama and romance and the occasional dramatic gunfight. Clean sawdust on the floor, a bartender polishing glasses. Piano music that somehow managed to make every scene feel like civilization was just around the corner. The pit was gone. The rats were gone. The smell was gone. The noise that 200 men make when they are watching something violent and betting on the outcome That was gone too. What replaced it was more comfortable, more filmable, more consistent with the story America wanted to tell about its frontier past. The real saloon floor was dark wood, stained with years of use, sawdust that was changed when the owner remembered to change it, the smell of raw spirits and unwashed bodies, and the animal presence that accompanied the blood sports. The light was low, oil lamps and candles, not the bright chandeliers of the movies. The noise was not the pleasant noise of entertainment. It was the noise of men who worked hard and dangerous jobs, using their one night in town to discharge everything that had been building for weeks. That discharge was ugly sometimes, messy, not heroic, not romantic, but it was real. And the real version, uncomfortable as it is, tells you more about what the frontier actually was than any amount of piano music and swinging doors ever could. The saloon was a business that sold release. It sold it in whiskey and in gambling and in the specific brutal spectacle of animals fighting each other in a wooden pit on a floor full of drunk and shouting men. That's the version nobody put in the movies. That's the version that actually existed. The piano music was there too. It just wasn't the main event. Let's go deeper into the specific economy of what was happening in these rooms, because the blood sports were not just entertainment. They were a financial system. And understanding the financial system explains why they persisted as long as they did and why they were so difficult to suppress. The saloon owner was at the center of it. He organized the event, provided the space, set up the pit, collected a percentage of the betting action, and sold drinks at whatever pace the crowd's excitement allowed, which on a blood sport night was significantly faster than on a quiet gambling night. His costs were the animals, the setup, and occasionally the bribes or arrangement fees that kept the local law from interfering. His revenue on a good night with a large crowd could be several times what a regular night brought in. The math was simple enough that any saloon owner who tried a blood sport event once and made money on it, which almost all of them did, had immediate reason to do it again. But the owner was not the only one profiting. The men who owned the animals were professionals in their own right. A man who bred and trained rat-baiting terriers had a business. He sold dogs. He leased dogs for events. He traveled from town to town with a circuit of animals, contracting with saloon owners who wanted to offer the entertainment without the overhead of keeping animals full-time. His dogs had records, documented kills, documented times, documented performances against specific types of competition, and those records were how he set his prices. This was not casual. This was an industry. A good terrier with a documented record was worth real money, better than a good saddle horse in some cases. The men who bred them knew bloodlines the way cattlemen knew cattle bloodlines. Which sires produced the fastest dogs? Which bitches passed on the right jaw structure? Which crosses resulted in animals with both the speed and the aggression that made a champion? The betting market depended on this knowledge being unequally distributed. A man who knew a dog's actual record, who understood how it performed against different conditions and different types of rats, had an advantage over a man who was betting on appearance or reputation, or the word of whoever was standing next to him. And like any market where information is unequally distributed, the people with the best information made the most money. The men who ran these events understood this. They managed information deliberately. They kept certain details about their animals' records quiet. They allowed rumors to circulate that served their interests. A saloon owner who wanted to maximize his cut of the betting action had every reason to make the outcome feel uncertain, even when he had a good idea of how it would go. This is where the blood sports overlapped with the rigged gambling that the mythology does acknowledge. The card shark and the blood sport organizer were operating from the same basic principle: extract maximum value from men who were insufficiently informed about the true odds of what they were participating in. The frontier West was full of these information asymmetries. The man who knew more made money from the man who knew less. The blood sports were just one venue where that principle operated. Now consider what the experience was like for the animals themselves, not sentimentally, but practically, because the practical reality shaped the spectacle. The rats used in rat baiting were not random wild rats. They were collected and then conditioned. Starvation made them more aggressive. Crowding made them more aggressive. A crate of rats that had been kept together for 2 days without food was not a collection of frightened small animals. It was a seething mass of things that had already been fighting each other for space and food, and that had nothing left to lose. When they went into the pit, they did not scatter and hide in corners. They fought. They bit. The dog that went in with them was going into something that would fight back from every direction simultaneously. A great rat-baiting dog did not hesitate at the edge of the pit. It went in immediately, moving fast, dispatching animals with a single shake, not stopping to finish one before moving to the next, not wasting time on already dying rats when there were live ones to reach. Watching a skilled dog work was, by the accounts of people who were there and described it, genuinely impressive in a mechanical way, like watching a well-designed piece of machinery do exactly what it was built to do. The crowd could see this. They had bets riding on it. The emotional investment was immediate and total. And this is where things change again, because the crowd itself is a crucial part of understanding what these events were. The men in that room were not passive observers. The betting made them participants. When you have money on the dog's performance becomes personal. Every kill is a small victory. Every near miss is a physical shock. The 100 men around the pit were not watching a dog and some rats. They were watching their own money move through the action in real time. This is the psychological mechanism that made the blood sports so effective as entertainment. Not the violence itself, though the violence was part of it, but the combination of violence and financial stake that made the viewer's nervous system respond as if he were in the pit himself. A good gambler knows this feeling and manages it. He stays cool, watches the action, makes calculated adjustments to his positions when the opportunity arises. A bad gambler, and the frontier saloon had far more bad gamblers than good ones, is consumed by it. He bets more when he's losing because he needs to recover. He bets more when he's winning because he believes he's on a streak. Either way, he bets more. The saloon owner understood this. The event was designed around it. The interval between rounds, between one batch of rats and the next dog, or between one dog's turn and another's, was exactly long enough for men to process what they had just seen, adjust their mental state, and make another bet. Not long enough to sober up. Not long enough to walk out. The pacing of the evening was itself a tool, and the drinking was timed to the action. Bartenders knew that the moments of highest tension, the final seconds of a timed event, the moment when the outcome was still genuinely uncertain, were not good moments to push for another round. Men were too focused. But the moment after resolution, after the crowd had erupted and the bets had paid out and the emotional charge had discharged, that was the moment. That was when a good bartender moved through the crowd with a bottle and a question, and that was when most men said yes. The saloon was a machine. Every part of it was designed to maximize extraction. The blood sports were the engine that ran it on certain nights, and everything else, The drinking, the gambling, the music that played in the intervals was calibrated to the blood sports rhythm. This is the saloon that actually existed, not in every town, not every night, but across the frontier West with enough regularity and consistency that it was, by any reasonable standard, normal. Walk into the most famous saloons of the era, the ones whose names appear in the history books, the ones that the mythology built legends around, and the blood sports were there, not hidden, not shameful by the standards of the time, just part of what the place was. A traveler who arrived in a cow town in the summer of 1875 and asked a local where to spend the evening would have been given directions to the best saloon in town. He would have walked in, found a drink, found a card game, and possibly found himself at the edge of a pit. The local who gave him directions would not have thought to warn him. It would not have occurred to him that a warning was necessary. That's the measure of how normal this was. The shock runs in the other direction now. We look back at it, and the shock is that it was so ordinary, that men went about the business of their evenings, drinking, gambling, socializing, with a blood sport happening in the center of the room, the way a sports bar today might have a game on the televisions. Background noise, part of the atmosphere, the thing that kept the energy in the room at a certain level, while the real business of the evening, the extraction of money from people who had temporarily suspended their better judgment, proceeded all around it. This is the Wild West saloon that nobody put in the movies. Not because it was too violent. The movies put plenty of violence in saloons, usually in the form of fights and shootings, but because the specific kind of violence that actually characterized these places most consistently was not the kind that could be turned into a hero's story. A man who draws his gun and shoots a villain is a hero. A room full of men watching a dog kill 100 rats while they bet on the outcome is something else entirely. It resists narrative. It has no moral arc. It is just men doing what men do when they are far from home and have money in their pockets and nowhere, in particular, to be until morning. It is human, and it is not flattering. The mythology needed flattering, so it found the version it could work with and built the saloon from that. The real saloon, the one with the pit in the center of the floor, and the sawdust that needed changing, and the smell that hit you at the door, that one got left outside. It was always there, though. Just outside the frame, it's still there, in the records, in the newspaper, notices that advertised the events, in the sheriff's reports that noted them, in the journals of men who walked through those doors and wrote down what they saw, because they couldn't quite believe it was as real as it was. It was real. It was ordinary. And it was nothing like the movies. Here is the final question worth sitting with. If you had walked into one of these saloons in 1875, not knowing what was there, what do you think your reaction would have been? Shock? Or would the crowd around you have pulled you in? Tell us in the comments. Because the men who described it for the first time almost always said the same thing. They stayed longer than they meant to.